caveman instinct, I guess, was to hide because this thing could eat me. So I hid behind a tree, and I looked up again, and it was gone.
Sometimes
I
wonder if they come through portals or something like that. There has been a lot of sightings here recently of Thunderbird, and there is groups that go out looking for Thunderbird. But when you get a bunch of people, it's like anything, right? If you go out looking for Bigfoot or Thunderbird or Mothman, you're not going to find it. It's going to be one day you're out there. A bunch of people. Yeah, you're out there, by yourself, walking around the lake or down a trail. And all of a sudden, you might run into some cryptic, But if you have a bunch of people making noise, you're never going to find anything, I don't think.
Yeah, you're most likely to find something like that if you're just one or two people. Because if you have a big group of people, they're going to hide. they're going to be afraid of you instead of you afraid of them. When there's one or two people, they're going to feel they have the upper hand. And that they're more in control of whatever may happen.
Well, unless it's a prehistoric one, it loves eating flesh, they're going to grab the one they can get away with, Haven't you ever seen the day the Earth stood still or something like that, where a pterodactyl comes down and grabs this guy and starts flying off with him? I mean, I don't know. But there's been a lot of reports of like Thunderbird and Mothman lately, and it's going all across the country. A good friend I have who I developed the friendship because he's been a guest on my show numerous times. He sits there and he works for a lot of museums. He's into bones, reconstructing bones from museums, of dinosaurs. He searched the whole world. Finding bones and stuff like that. He actually even has a museum in Texas. And,
That's awesome.
Oh, yeah. But, he's, even in Texas, there's reports of Mothman. And, he had this one friend her best friend was driving in the car at night and hit something. And then all of a sudden it realized it was like this, creature with wings. And she got out, and the thing stared at her, and then took off, and it actually did damage to her car. And it's not in Chicago, it's not in Florida, it's getting reported nowadays everywhere.
Well, the more the population of humans grows, the less land and places they have to hide. So it's not uncommon that more encounters are going to happen. Because their habitat is dwindling, and their ability to hide from us is also dwindling.
Oh, don't forget, climate changes, I think, is having an effect because,
that's true.
So the climate changes, all these birds and huge birds, are kind of migrating different directions because the magnetic field is changing. That's throwing them off. Then the climate's changing. So, I think that's maybe why we're starting to see more of these things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I've noticed up here. I live in New York. I've noticed bugs that I've only seen in the South. I've noticed them coming up here now. And I took a picture of this one freaky looking little orange flying bug on my windshield wiper one day, and I looked it up online, and it was a South American bug. And I'm like, what are you doing here?
Interesting. Talking about bugs, I'm going to ask you a question because you're a paranormal investigator and all this stuff. Back in my first marriage, we bought a house. It was what they call FHA repo, and they went through, and remodeled the house inside and out. And we moved in. We were in there for about a month or two. Not a fly problem. And me and my wife took off for about 3 hours. We come back home, and there was literally thousands of flies. Now, I'm not talking baby flies. We're talking flies that are huge, about ready to drop over dead because they're that old. And it was crazy because, I had to get a, exterminator out. And even the exterminator said, he said, you had a fly problem. I said, no, there was not a fly problem. There wasn't even a fly in the house. It just all of a sudden appeared. And he goes, I can't understand that because these flies were old, they're at the end of their life. And
wow.
Sometimes I wonder if maybe something strange was going on in that house.
It could be. There's actually many reasons that they could have got in through air conditioning, ventilation.
Didn't have air conditioning.
Sewage, like the drain pipes.
Yeah, but we're talking literally. You couldn't open your mouth without having a mouthful of flies. That's how bad it was.
That's weird.
It's like somebody came with a semi truck and backed it up to the front door and let all the flies out. It was like tens of thousands of these suckers.
That is weird. We've had that happen here with ladybugs, but outside, not inside. And then it turns out that ladybug groups release millions of them down at the beach or something. But nobody does that with flies.
No, and a lot of times I've talked to a couple other investigators and they said maybe again that something was going on. The house was maybe haunted or something. More on the evil side, and that could be one of the traces of it.
I've heard that too. That when there's something bad in the house, that flies will can accompany that. The Hinsdale house has had fly issues with a particular room, and the rest of the house will be fine. There won't be any flies in the rest of the house, but there'll be one room, and they'll walk in, and the window's covered with flies.
Yeah. Well, this was more than that. I mean, you would have. When I walked in there, I felt like, oh my God, what's going on? I never seen anything like that. I mean, there was no, and the exterminator checked all around the house and couldn't find anything that would have attracted him, let alone these were like flies. They live adult, ready to drop over old age flies, huge horse flies. It was just, yeah. And, after that happened, I'll be honest with you, we didn't keep the house much more than a month or two after that. It didn't feel, I don't know. That's the only thing I ever lived in. I just didn't feel comfortable living in it.
Yeah. Well, I wouldn't either. There was just like millions of flies in my room.
I don't know. No. But, my grandmother and my grandfather, when they came over to the area where I lived with my parents when I was a little kid, they rented a house, and they would hear bangs at night. Now they lived in that house for like a year or two, and grandma would come up and say, hey, things were moving around in the kitchen. They would hear like banging on the doors, on the walls, and all that stuff. Now I started, as a kid, I figured, okay, my grandfather and my grandmother are losing it, right? Well, this went on the whole time they were living there, and it got to a point that Emma said to me, I can't live here anymore. We're going to go find another place. And they did. And then I guess the next tenant came in, went underneath the house to do something. And here was a blanket with a chain wrapped around it. Okay, so they, out of curiosity, because it made the newspaper, the owner of the house, originally owner of the house that was renting it to people, he murdered his wife, wrapped her up in a blanket, put her under the crawl space of the house.
Wow.
And, and then,
oh my God.
And then, when that came out and, and he got arrested and it was in all the news at the time, what he did and then I'm sitting there thinking what my grandmother was saying about the knocking, on the doors and,
just
things.
Trying to get their attention.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
That is cool, but sad and wow.
Yeah. Could you imagine that?
Yeah, that's just usually noises like that. They're trying to get your attention. They're trying to let you know that they're there, or they want to be found, or they want to be, they want you to know they're still there.
Yeah. Well, I guess, I don't know. I wouldn't want to live in a place like that. I'll tell you that. Now,
a lot of people don't, but there's a lot of people that do.
Yeah, they don't realize maybe what's in their, crawl space or up in their attic. So what have you been doing lately on ghost hunting or anything?
Not much on the ghost hunting other than that man who had lost his father and son. Actually, we probably need to in our house again because things are starting to happen again, and that usually means they want our attention. And we haven't been paying enough attention to them lately.
Interesting.
I did go to the lake the other day. There was a lot more beach, but just like I said, you still couldn't see in the water, and there was a lot of mudslides in the clay. And but I did find a couple of things. I found another mashed up bent fork, and what else? I found something else: some copper wire, some copper electrical stuff. Something else, but I can't remember what it was.
Well, you seem to find a lot of interesting things. It's just people just don't realize, that there's a lot of nice, interesting, bottles and you found this stuff from World War I. These buttons and all this other stuff, dog tags and all that stuff. That's interesting.
There's a lot of history too. I researched just about every button and medal and tag I found, and learned a lot about who was stationed there, what units, what regiments, and what these symbols meant on these medals, and what symbols on this item where it was. And I learned a lot. And I found a mystery.
Oh, yeah.
One of the commandants that was in charge of the 28th Regiment, there was actually several that were in charge of the 28th. And one of the commandants, Colonel Moreau, used to be stationed there. And he was an avid person. He just loved the old Fort Niagara. He lived in the newer part, the brick buildings. And he was renovating the old fort, trying to renew it to what it used to be. And he fell in love with it, and he did not want to leave. And he got orders that he was to be transferred, and he didn't want to go. And he tried to get out of it, and they wouldn't let him. And all of a sudden, like a week before he had to go, he died. And they said he died of a heart attack. But I found an article by a man who did some research and interviewed one of the last survivors of the 28th Regiment, who stated that he had killed himself in one of the commandant quarters, one of the commandant's houses on the property, that he shot himself in the library. And there's one commandant house remaining, but I got through to him once at that particular house, but I don't think that was his house. I think he was in one of the other ones that was torn down. Because the one we got to talk to him briefly at was actually belonged to an admiral who we've gotten to talk to several times. But there's this whole mystery about, okay, did he die of a heart attack or did he shoot himself?
Yeah. Well, what you can always do is go back to the library and, look at the newspaper in that time frame.
That's all the documentation about him says he died of a heart attack, because they don't want people to know that he killed himself if he did, because that would be embarrassing.
Well, yeah, especially to the military. Hey, Karen, Our time is up.
Oh, wow.
It went by.
That was fast.
It went really fast, didn't it? Well, if you find anything really exciting, but if you find any more grenades, okay, don't touch them.
Or phosphorus flares, the big ones that they toss off of the cargo ships when somebody falls overboard. Do not pick those up and walk away with them.
Now, the one you found, was it when it was been discharged, or was it never went off?
It went off, but it didn't finish. It was still armed. and it still had stuff in it, I guess, because I walked the mile back to my truck with it
No,
and put it in the back of